Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to Mornings with Jacqueline. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Lawrence, and today we are on location at the Underground Railroad African American Museum right here in Santa Rosa, California. Today I have with me a very special guest. Her name is Alyssa McDonald, and she just happens to be my daughter. And Alyssa will be discussing with us today Black women's attitudes and perceptions of interracial relationships. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited to talk about this. I have my Bachelor's of Science from California State University Stanislaus in experimental psychology. So it's research-based. So I've done a lot of research on different topics that have kind of piqued my interest. I've always had kind of a scientific mind, and I have all these questions. And so with my background now, I've decided why not answer some of these questions that have been haunting me since I was little.
Okay, great. So why don't you share with us a little, Alyssa, about the research that you've discovered?
Okay, well, growing up, I oftentimes heard you and your friends and just Black women that I grew up around talking about interracial relationships and just how they would get so angry sometimes when they would see a Black man with a white woman.
Not me, of course.
Of course not you.
I had gotten over it by then. But go ahead, Alyssa.
Or saying phrases such as, I'm going to get me a white man. Or, look at him with her. And just things like that. And I just always wondered, who cares? Who cares who they're loving? Why do we have this angst towards it? And then as I started to grow up, I started to notice that some of it was being passed on to me. And I was like, I don't even know why I'm feeling this way. Is it just because I've seen it my whole life? And so I kind of wanted to delve deep and kind of figure out the history behind this and why we as a race of women tend to look down upon interracial relationships and just our attitudes in them in general. Obviously, not all of us do, but from what I've seen, it's a very prominent attitude towards it.
Right. And in all honesty, at one time, it used to bother me to see a Black man with a white woman, especially being that there were so many eligible and beautiful, intelligent Black women, such as myself, of course. That they were passing up. But that was in my younger days. Eventually, I got over it. And a lot of it is in my play, that I wrote, Single and Waiting, and also it's in my book, Single and Waiting.
Yeah,
so I talk about all that.
I'm gonna get me a white man.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was kind of based upon that phrase that I always heard.
Right. Mm-hmm. So let's share with us some of this research.
Okay, well, kind of to start with the history of it, interracial relationships in the U.S. actually date back prior to slavery. Oh. And they were actually accepted generally at that point. It wasn't there wasn't the amount of segregation that we experience now.
Right.
But then once the slave trade started kicking off, they started enacting rules in order for it to kind of legalize and criminalize interracial marriages.
Oh.
Yeah, and it actually only happened because there was a disparity. They didn't know whether to make the offspring of these relationships free or slaves. Mm-hmm. So that was the only real basis behind it. And basically, the first law stated that if a white woman was to marry a black man, her and all her children would then at that point become slaves.
Wow. So the white woman would become a slave?
Yes.
By virtue of the fact that she would marry a black man?
Exactly.
Wow, and their children. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
So that's how it kind of became legalized and criminalized. Right. And 40 out of the 50 states that we have at one time had laws against interracial marriage.
Wow.
Even in 1950, there were still 15 states that didn't allow this type of marriage. So that's only 70 years ago.
Right.
You know, my grandma was alive in 1950.
Exactly.
And there were still 15 states that were not allowed to marry. And in the 60s...
You're talking about the interracial marriage.
Yes.
Okay.
Interracial marriages.
Uh-huh.
And in the 60s is when they found that type of that those laws were actually unconstitutional to have. But up until 1990, there were still cases of judges supporting those laws, even though they were found not to be allowed.
1990?
1999. I'm sorry.
1999.
Yep. All the way
you
up
were
to the
born
millennium.
then.
I was born and half grown. I'm just
Wow.
kidding.
Okay, she thought she was.
But yeah, so up until 1999, there were still judges supporting this. And the first couple to actually challenge them were the Lovings. It was Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving.
Yes.
And they actually went up to D.C. in 1958. And
now let me ask you, was he black and she white? Or
she was black and
she was
he
black
was white.
and he was white. Okay.
Which we'll get into more about those relationships in a little while.
Okay.
But they went up to D.C. because interracial marriages were allowed at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And they got married. And then when they went back to their home in Virginia,
right,
where it was not allowed, they were arrested upon their arrival. And they were both sentenced to 1 year in jail. They served their 1 year in jail.
Yes.
And when they got out, they fought it with the Supreme Court.
Oh, great.
And the Supreme Court did find it unconstitutional. And so...
Oh, wonderful.
It was at that point that these laws were kind of unruled.
Right.
In the U.S., after that point, interracial marriages tripled.
Mm-hmm.
And currently they make up 1.2 million U.S. marriages are interracial.
Okay.
So that's a pretty substantial amount considering who gets married these days.
And you attribute that tripling to the fact that it's become more acceptable. Correct?
Yeah, that it was found constitutional.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I guess my question was, what is the main reason that would cause like a black woman to have distress in these situations? And I think
when you say in these situations, in what are you talking about? Interracial relationships?
When they see them, not when they're part of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What would cause them the most stress? And I think a lot of it has to do with availability. From my research, experts say that there's about 2 million black men in prison, and that was in 2000. All my data is from around 2000 from the U.S. Census Bureau.
Okay.
So there are about 2 million black men currently or at some point incarcerated.
Right.
The remaining amount of black men, 1%, are out of the closet as homosexuals.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you see the big disparity. There's so many black men that are either behind bars or turning to homosexuality. It leaves black women with less of a option. And I actually found this really startling data about, it talked about black women and socioeconomic status.
Right.
Because relationships in same socioeconomic status tend to be more successful.
Okay.
And a big part of socioeconomic status is education.
Right.
So there was a study, and the study found that 747,000 African American women between the ages of 18 and 24 were currently in college. And 9,000 were currently in prison between the ages of 18 and 24.
Right.
However, only 480,000 African American males were in college. So that's about half
right.
of the amount of black females in college.
Right.
And a startling 180,000 were in prison. That
compared to the 9,000 women?
That's 20 times as many African American males between the ages of 18 and 24.
Wow.
In prison.
Wow.
So that kind of like shows you the availability of black men at the same socioeconomic status
or lack thereof
of black women are not there.
Yes.
And so either for an educated black woman such as yourself or I,
Yes.
either our choices are to skimp and find the leftovers and the scraps that we can
The
dig
remnants.
up, or to lower our status.
Right.
And kind of settle for maybe a man without a high school degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a difficult situation that black women find themselves in. And I feel it's kind of a sad situation. And it makes a lot of sense why availability is a big issue.
So let me ask you a question, Alyssa. You said a little while back that people of the same social economic status tend to have more successful relationships where interracial relationships are concerned.
Where all
relationships are concerned. So that includes not only the higher statuses, but also the lower statuses, correct?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, so it also would be very negative for the person in the lower socioeconomic status to be dating somebody or married to somebody above their socioeconomic status. A lot of times it leads to self-esteem issues, depression, feeling of not being worthy.
Inadequacy, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where those issues arise. Mm-hmm. So after I found that data, I mean, it made a lot of sense where the anger came from, but I felt like there was something more historical, something more deep-rooted in where these feelings were coming from.
Right.
And I started to think that perhaps it wasn't stats as much as how we felt about ourselves as black women.
Okay.
Self-esteem issues.
Okay.
And so upon my research, I found that black women historically were looked upon as barbarians, sex-crazed barbarians.
Absolutely.
When white men in slavery days would rape a black woman,
right?
They blamed it on her.
Yes.
And it was because she wanted it. She's putting herself out there. She deserved it. It was always the black woman's fault.
Right. The Jezebel.
The Jezebel, exactly. However, for the white women, it was never their fault.
Of course not.
So it kind of caused us to feel like our self-worth wasn't quite as there as much as other races of women might be, because we were never looked upon that way in like slavery days and even after that, during Jim Crow.
Right. So what I've discovered during the days of slavery is because we were raped of our bodies, then what I find even today is that many African American women feel that most of what they have to offer is between their legs, because that is what was valued so much, not only during the days of slavery, but also as the ages have gone by. So you see, but we're not talking about that right now, right?
Kind of chime in with you, I do have a little bit of information on that as well, and it kind of ties into it because it was the whole idea that we were so sexualized. We were considered sexual beings,
right?
Like that was what made us happy. When I don't understand how somebody screaming and crying while being raped makes them seem like they're excited about it. I mean, if that's what you're into, that's what you're into. But I mean, I don't see how that would be showing somebody's into it. But
right. In some of my research, some of the women did equate that need for their body with their worth, and they did embrace it, in fact.
Oh yeah, of course. It was a symbol of status. It was the only way for them to kind of have any not respect, but kind of respect.
Right.
Especially amongst their fellow slaves.
Right. So Alyssa, I have a question for you. What is the percentage of black man, white woman relationship versus white woman, black man relationships, or did I... Black woman, white man relationships?
Well, I don't have percentages, but interracial relationships, black-white interracial relationships, are 2.65 times more likely to involve a male and a black male and a white female.
Right.
So it's definitely more common and more accepted.
But I've noticed an increase in African American women going to men of other races as well, though. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that brings up a great topic about the increase in black women seeing and dating and starting interracial relationships. It kind of became like a switch, and there's a lot of reasons that people say that it could have happened, depending on who you ask. Some of it stems from anger from some people. Just like, I'm fed up with these black men.
Right.
I'm gonna go get me a white man, as you used so say.
Never did, but it sounded good at the time.
And then some of it again goes to availability, socioeconomic status.
Right.
If you want somebody who's educated, your chances are you're gonna have to get a white man. As well as just some women kind of feel like the black man has turned their back on their race.
Right.
So, who cares at that point? Like, let me just do what I want. Because it's far more typical for a black woman to have the idea of sticking to their man, sticking to their race. But you're seeing that kind of switch.
Okay. So, I know that there was some sort of resistance for black women, like going over to the other side, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But now you're saying that that's starting to change more.
Oh yeah, it's drastically increasing. There's 161,000 interracial relationships involving black women and white men. Mm-hmm. Now marriages, and that's increased drastically from a year per year. There's 161,000, so that's a great increase.
Per year, wow.
Yeah, that's a great increase from
where it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Alyssa, I so appreciate your being here. Do you have any closing remarks for us? Anything that you might want to add?
I just wanted to add that whether you believe it's wrong or whether you believe it's right, it's not really the issue. The biggest issue is that you have to notice that it's happening. Interracial relationships are becoming normal and commonplace, and it's kind of one of those things you better hold on, because here they come. I mean, you see them everywhere you go in the grocery store, and I mean, everybody's on this kick of love is love. Well, this is kind of love is love, and
so that also means more interracial marriages. There's going to be absolutely more interracial children as a result of those marriages. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for America?
Actually, biracial children are actually very interesting. I also was really interested in them, and I kind of studied them a little bit. Biracial children, in one study, they took Pacific Islander children, white children, and African American children who had same race parents, mm-hmm. and compared it to the biracial children of a mix of all those groups. And their IQs were drastically higher. Their health was drastically better. And it's kind of like this idea of the more closely related you are to somebody, the less viable your offspring will be. And so if you are dating, marrying, having children with somebody that's the same race, they're going to be more closely related to you. Right. So there's not as much genetic variability. Oh. However, if you are dating outside your race, it actually makes for a more viable offspring. And studies have also predicted that around 2050, the majority of people will be biracial, and having one race people will become more rare in the U.S. than actually having a biracial person.
Right, and we're already at a point here in California where there are more minorities, more Hispanics mm-hmm. than whites. So I believe that, well, I've heard all my life that there's going to come a time when there are going to be fewer whites and more minorities. But now you're saying in 2050 there's going to be more biracial. So
that's why some scientists who have thought that there was going to be, the more minorities taking over, some are not sure if it's going to be that there's going to be less Caucasian people, or if it's going to be that the majority of Caucasian people have minority blood.
Wow, very interesting. Alyssa McDonald, my daughter, I thank you so much for coming out
Thanks for
today
having
to
me.
the Underground Railroad African American Museum. Well, she is my daughter. And thank you all for tuning in to Mornings with Jacqueline, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.